As a mental health advocate and author, I love books. Books have the capacity to inspire, educate, transform, and ultimately help readers all over the world. So if you want to publish your book or if you need help writing your story, I highly recommend Mindstir Media, rated the #1 best book publisher around the country. Mindstir Media can help you no matter where you are in the book writing or publishing process. Go to mindstirmedia.com to learn more and schedule a consultation.
Out Comes the Sun with Mariel Hemingway and Melissa Yamaguchi. Out Comes the Sun compassionately helps you navigate mental wellness practices that you can apply to your daily life. And we tell your story. And now, Mariel Hemingway and Melissa Yamaguchi.
Welcome, everybody, to Out Comes the Sun Radio with my co-host and best friend, Melissa Yamaguchi. I'm Mariel Hemingway. And today we're going to talk about airlines.
Yep.
That's our sunrise section. We're talking about the airlines. And I know that everybody has probably a very strong opinion about airlines, because I think that, the way we were brought up flying. I mean, let me take a little venture back to the days of when I first flew and you got dressed up. I mean, that was one of the things that happened. I used to dress up as a kid. You were so excited to fly, and airline hostesses, and there were no hosts back then, they were dressed up, and it was just a different experience, because it is quite challenging now to fly.
Well, and I want to tell you something about, just to throw it back just a little bit for our audience. I had a TWA bag and outfit for my dolls, Chrissy and Velvet.
Yes.
As their hair pulled out of their head, and they went from either a bob. I had them wear bobs when they were flying. And when they got off work, I pulled the hair out so they could wear their disco outfit and go out for the night.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
That's so perfect. I love that, because I had that too. I think I had an actual TWA bag for traveling. We went to Europe. I was lucky enough to be a kid that got to go to Europe with my parents, and I carried that it was like a treasure. It was a treasure. And I remember that my parents, I was in coach, because you were a kid and you didn't get a good whatever. It was a great seat because I was tiny, so who cared, right? And they were up in first class, and I remember going up there, and it was like you'd entered another world where people, it was magnificent. Can I just say, I miss those days.
Well, I'll tell you something new that's been happening with the airlines, because it's changed so much, is that in Auckland, New Zealand, Auckland Airlines are now going to be weighing guests before they get on the flight.
What?
Now, they swear that neither they or anyone around them will know your actual weight. It's just so that the collective weight of all the guests coming onto the plane can be sent to the pilot, so they can say, this is how much is entering, so that they can gauge, because they're finding that as
fuel and all that stuff, but whoa.
What they're finding, that as we get bigger, that the drag on the plane is becoming harder, and our flights right now, as it stands, are, with the exception of a few airlines that are giving good prices, are the prices are astronomical, and so they're finding that they've got to try to cut corners, so to speak. So can you imagine being the last person on? They're like, ma'am, you and your 165 pounds need to step to the side.
You're like,
really?
Oh, yeah. What are you talking about? Wow. That's going to cost, well, it's probably won't happen in the States. I don't think we'll allow that, will we? But we might have to. I mean,
what they're saying, maybe Auckland's being more forthright. For all we know, it's happening now. They say that as you stop to give your ticket, that they have an underpad underneath. It looks like a little welcome mat that people are on, and they don't even realize that as they're standing there, the weight is being shot in a collective to the.
Well,
I think the trick is to hold your kid right behind you and run through it as fast as you can, so they don't really know. What is she, 170? Is she 120? What is she? What's going on here?
crazy. I mean, flight is going to change exponentially in the next, I mean, in the next 5 years, we're going to, Bobby talks, we're going to be flying, what do you call it? Like at warp speed, but that's not what I mean. What am I thinking? I mean, we're going to be flying planes because they've been ordered where literally you will get to Europe in 2 hours. You will get, to Asia in a few hours.
It's like the bullet trains. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be, and I'm actually surprised that it hasn't happened sooner. I mean, I was, back in the day, I was fortunate enough to fly the Concorde 3 times. I flew the Concorde to Paris and once to London and back, and it was an incredible experience. But that just makes me think that this technology has been around far longer, but it's kind of that thing where they put so much money into the planes that they have. It's
Right.
that, but technology is advancing so quickly that now it's going to jump into airlines. And, according to our friend John Sani, who comes on our podcast periodically, in the next 7 years, soon travel will be free. Services will be free.
That's what I said. I told you, from his lips to God's ears, because
I
that
know.
cannot come fast enough.
I know, because flight is so expensive.
I just don't know how. Did he explain how, Mariel? Did he say how that it would be free?
No, and I kept saying, like, how do we make money? How do we do this? But he said that you're coming from that place of not knowing what it's like, and yet you didn't know what it was like to only watch movies on your, computer, even watch movies on your phone and talk to somebody, face to face on FaceTime. We didn't know what that was like not that long ago. It was what,
Well,
years ago or less than 10 years ago that
well,
we
we're
that.
gonna.
So as it happens, it will transition in a way that it'll make sense when it makes sense. But I still couldn't quite conceive of how like, how do you make a living? And really what he talked about was you have to tune into your genius. You have to extrapolate what you're good at, because the human can never be taken away. I was so grateful to hear this part. The humanness of our existence is, like,
That can't be taken away.
AI be damned. They'll never be humans, right?
Well, we're going to ask our audience to tune into their genius and stay with us, because I'm going to sit here and imagine, while we break away, flying free. If I dream it, they will come.
Exactly. And don't leave, because we have a great, incredible guest who is an amazing photographer today named Cory Richards. So stay tuned, because he has something very cool to say. So we have an incredible guest. Oh my God, I'm super excited because he's so talented. His pictures, he's a photographer. His name is Cory Richards. He's internationally renowned photographer, filmmaker, director, and writer. Geez, let's do some more. He is an artist and storyteller, and he passionately explores the human experience through all mediums. Cory uses his life as a conduit to illuminate the global issues we face and how to overcome them through rehumanization, the reimagining of leadership and vulnerability. His work for National Geographic magazine began with adventure features exploring the most remote corners of the globe, from Antarctica to the Russian Arctic. As a professional climber, wow, I got to introduce you to Bobby. Anyway, his early career was defined by high-risk expeditions and leaned on his unique skill set to capture stories that were largely out of reach to others, and then the avalanche. Okay. So welcome, Cory.
Hi, and then the avalanche, and then the world exploded. So thank you guys so much for having me. This is such an honor. I really, when I got the email, I was like, absolutely, yes, I'll stay up all night to do this. So I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Well, you really do have an amazing, I mean, your story is so amazing because apparently I was walking today on the beach and I was thinking about you, and I was thinking, you know, I'm a very physical person. I'm with my life partner is a climber like yourself, and he considers himself a photographer, but we won't tell him he actually is. He, you know, like, so my world is kind of around like adventure or physicality. And I think maybe, I don't know for sure, but I think that I learn through physicality. Like I get things in my body first, and it kind of helps my mind because, you know, what I said, and then the avalanche. I mean, for you, that was the wake up call. Am I right? That was the wake up call that said, oh, I got to change shit. Right.
Well, yeah, and in a lot of ways, I mean, it really has taken me, I think it's, 12 years now. So the avalanche happened on Gasherbrum 2, which is the 13th highest mountain in the world, in the winter of 2010-11. And, at that time, and still actually, and this sounds a little like, I'm just trying to place it like I'm still the only American to have ever climbed one of the highest mountains in the world in winter. And so that had just happened. And we were coming down and we were coming down through a storm, and a large amount of snow had fallen, and we were moving from camp 1 to base camp. There was just myself and 2 other people. And we got hit by an avalanche. And what's so interesting about that is we were all mostly buried. And in these avalanches, most people just don't survive, but we were buried. And my first thought was, well, both my partners are dead, but really what happened, and the reason it changed so much, so dramatically, is because I filmed as we were, as I started to come out of it, and I was able to free myself and realize my partners weren't dead. I felt myself starting to cry. And so I turned on this little camera and I took some footage of it. And then a little while later, I took a photograph of my face, and that photograph then became the footage. And then that photograph became my entree into the world of National Geographic. And so in this one moment, my career started to go really uphill. And then slowly at the same time, my personal life started to go really downhill. And so there was this paradox, there's big confusion about what was happening. But to use your words, that's when I was like, it woke me up, but it's also taken literally 12 years to truly fully understand it.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. That's incredible because, oh God, I just can't imagine. I'm trying to imagine. I mean, you tell your story so well that I actually can visualize, and I've spent a great deal of time in cold weather and snow, but to be buried and literally thinking you're buried alive, right? You think you're right? Wasn't that part of, but weren't you an addict before that? Or am I getting that wrong? Or
well, I was, how do I say this?
Or are we all? No, I'm sorry.
Are we all? Yes. And so there's so much to unpack here, but I'm just going to go through really quickly. So I was a smart kid. I went to high school 2 years early, and then all of a sudden something happened, and we can dig into that. But all of a sudden I dropped out of school and I got put in treatment. I was in treatment for 8 months, and it was this inpatient outpatient thing. I ran away 3 times. I ended up living on the street for a small period of time,
Wow.
So addict, I think that's a very that was an identity that I started taking on very young. And it wasn't until after the avalanche that I started to unpack what happens, the mechanisms of the mind, and what happens in the brain, and what happens when we're raised in traumatic, albeit very loving, circumstances in my case. And so when I started to really pull that apart, as like I said, it's taken over a decade for me to really understand and start to grow into and out of old identities and into new stories, and also to really understand what happens in the brain. And so that's been this long journey that I've been on. And certainly it's culminated as I've been finishing my book, my memoir. And I mean, even now doing the edits of this stuff, I'm like, oh my God, it's stuff like still comes up to me every day where I'm connecting the dots. And, so anyway, yeah, that was a very long story short.
No, it actually wasn't. And it helps us to understand who you are and what you had to go through to get to this place where, I mean, for Melissa and I, we often talk about telling our story is it's very important to tell your story, because once you tell your story, then your story becomes your story and it doesn't define you anymore, right? Then you can release from the story and kind of come out and have access to what that story did for your mental health, like your journey, like who am I now, and how can I place that in the past, but use it so that people can understand their own story and kind of break open. And I think that's what you mean by the brain. You know what I mean? Like understanding what the brain is doing.
Yeah. Well, and then you make such a brilliant point by bringing up story, because at the center of everything, and I think people really underestimate that word, but if you think about it, story is quite literally the most important thing that we do as human beings. We say, oh, it's love, it's this, it's that, it's relationships. Story informs how you understand love. Story informs the relationships you have. Story informs every single person that's listening to this woke up this morning and told themselves a very specific story about who they are and the world they live in. Yep. And that story can be accurate, or it can be wildly flawed. The facts might remain the same, but the story that you apply to something can be totally different. And the thing with mental health that I've really learned is that we have these mental health can be a very sticky story. And a lot of times it's a story of brokenness, right? It's a story of deficit. It's a story of this happened to me and then this, And so like for me, bipolar, I was diagnosed bipolar 2 when I was 14. And for the longest time, it was a story of something's wrong with me, like I'm broken. My head's all fucked up. Right. And so there's that story. And then the other story is, well, I'm brilliant and I'm amazing and all this stuff. And then there's the middle, which is I have a neurodivergent brain that behaves in a very certain way. And when managed correctly, this can be a superpower. That is one is wildly false in one direction, one is wildly false in the other direction. And somewhere in the middle, there's a different story that says, used to my benefit, this can be the most beautiful thing in the world.
Right.
But it needs to be, it's like, anyway, you get it.
Oh my God. Well, it's very important. What you're saying is just so along the lines, and I apologize, Melissa, because I know you're probably burning to ask a question, but what that leads me to think, because you talk about the natural world, right? You talk and you take pictures of the natural world, you take pictures of nature. And I often talk about the 7 doctors, Dr. Sun, Dr. Air, Dr. Water, Dr. Exercise, Dr. Nutrition, Dr. Rest, and Dr.
I love that.
They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they're free. But those doctors, the natural world is kind of the way that we can navigate a highly expressive brain or a highly active brain, right? That's how you, I know that I was not diagnosed with bipolar, but I definitely was depressed most of my life until I found that sweet spot of lifestyle and connecting with nature in a way that made sense to every part of my body and my mind, and hopefully my spirit as well. So I think, am I correct in thinking that that is the natural world that you're speaking about when you talk about it?
Oh yeah, I mean, and for me, what nature represents is a way to ground and be back, because our world, the world we live in right now is literally so cerebral, and it captivates us through our minds, mostly because we're on our phones, and we're deeply overstimulated. And so in that way, we're always living literally outside of the natural world. So for me, when I talk about nature, I mean, we are all part of nature. We're not outside of it at all. And we tend to forget that because of the way our world functions. And so when I talk about it, I'm talking about something that's grounding, that brings us back to our deepest sense of personhood. And that doesn't require, it doesn't require psychologists. It doesn't require, that's all important, right? And we should absolutely hold space for that. But nature is in and of itself where we are completely and always at home and at peace. And if we can connect to that in whatever ways we can get a reprieve from the barrage of overwhelming stimulation that is constantly melting our minds right now. And climbing was that for me. And then it also had some negative, aspects to it as well. But, that's the other side of the story. So
yeah, no, I completely agree. Melissa, please help me out here.
I've got an observation. One is that I find it fascinating that you've been on this trajectory, right? Like you were this kid who was ahead of the game academically, and so much so that they were going to propel you into high school 2 years early, which is emotionally, physically, everything. I mean, the only thing that was advanced was your mind, because emotionally,
right,
you're still a kid, right?
Yeah.
So, but you've been on this trajectory, and then you get into climbing. Every aspect of your life has been begging for you to study the brain, because
Right.
I mean, climbing took such mental capacity. Everything's been like steering you. It's like the universe is just coaxing you along until you got to where you are. And as a brilliant spokesperson for this, but I want to highlight a point that you brought up earlier, if I may. You made a point of saying that the challenges that you faced, even in spite of being in a loving family. And I loved hearing you say that, because oftentimes when I work with clients of mine, if they have a child or a family member who has undergone any kind of challenge along the course,
Mm-hmm.
they're quick to say, but I thought I did everything right. And what did I do wrong? And I love that you highlighted, look, I came from a loving family. So it's not as though there was this massive societal deficit that was blatant, right? This was my struggle. I'd love for you to speak to that, because I know a lot of people they're trying to hide their child or their family member's issue because they don't want to make it look like a mark on them, or they're ashamed or embarrassed. So I love that you brought it up.
Well, it's such a, God, this is such a good point, and I'm so happy you picked up on it, because like, as I'm finishing my memoir, as I'm finishing my book, my mom, I'm here in Italy with my parents, and we're wandering around, and we have some really deep conversations. And she's like, I'm so scared. And I'm like, Mom, why? Let's back that up. First of all, I acknowledge that you're telling me you're scared, and I'm so grateful that you can voice that to me. But let's talk about why that is. And there's this sense that still in her generation, that because my life has had hurdles, that she necessarily did something wrong. Now, look, we are tapestries. We're interwoven. We're connected, and it's generational. The way she was raised influenced how she raised me. The fact that her mom probably had postpartum depression influenced the fact that she probably did, which influenced the fact that, my brother and I probably had insecure attachments. And you can get really deep into this stuff, and you can say, yes, there were some things that happened for sure that didn't square, that impacted me. But did you do anything wrong? No, you were doing literally, and I think most parents are, unless you can take this as far as you want, but I think most people really are trying to do the best they can with what they were given. And if they're carrying a huge burden of their own trauma and they're trying to parent through that, well, they're fighting a losing battle. It doesn't mean that they're to blame. There's a big difference between I mean, blaming somebody is sort of useless, right? It
Yeah.
happened. I can see that you loved me. And so now, as a 40-year-old man or 42-year-old man, we can talk about these things. But it's taken that amount of time. And I just want to highlight so clearly that you can be raised in a deeply loving, privileged household. You can have all the privilege that we talk about in contemporary culture, and the brain can still shoot out sideways through your ears, right? And in fact, a lot of times it does, because we're sort of overlooking those basal mechanisms that are built into us.
Yeah.
I mean, my parents loved me to death, right? And still, I'm bipolar too. So what does that say? Did they do something wrong? No, there was an environment that had some degree of trauma that triggered my brain to develop in a very certain way.
Yeah,
It's nobody's fault.
that I love that you brought that up, because that family genetic, because we do worry about, I think that was one of my biggest fears my entire childhood, was that I was going to end up, I have a schizophrenic sister, older sister, and then my sister Margot, who took her life, was bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather, probably Ernest, was probably, if he were to live today, would have been diagnosed
Almost certainly.
right?
Almost certainly. Yeah.
Panic episodes, and then deep depression, right? And yet we don't think, that he was not a valid human being and made an impact on our world, right?
Yeah.
But those fears are so big and they're so deep seated, and I love that, and it took me a long time in my life to realize, oh, that doesn't necessarily have to be me. That's not my story. And also, we can be orchestrators of a new story, right? You can tell your story, you can release the story, and then you can figure out ways to manage what you've been given, right?
Yeah. Well, and if we think of, so really Freud said this in 1895, and then Judith, I think it's Judith Herman, and I'm sorry if that name's wrong. She came back with it in 1995 that said, look, all psychological dysfunction, or what Freud was calling hysteria, is really just one diagnosis, and that's trauma. And so everything that we see is spinning forward from traumatic events, or a traumatic event or series of traumatic events, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And when we can understand what happened, that's the jumping off point. But to your point, oftentimes we think that understanding is healing. So we think, oh, I know what happened to me when I was a kid, and so now this explains everything. Yeah. Well, that doesn't change all the behaviors that you've learned for 35 or 40 or 70 years. Yeah. So that's where the story becomes problematic. Well, now I know the story, so now I'm healed. No. Now you know where to start. Does that make sense?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I see it. It's like, know your story, learn that it's a story, move on from the story, and figure out a solution. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. What you're talking about is great. I talk a little bit about something that you're not as known for, is your passion about fashion. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You have to just tell us a little bit about that. I know that's a complete segue, but it is fascinating.
Well, I mean, I started my photography career in fashion. I was a fashion assistant. I assisted a photographer. I traveled all over with him, and I started as a second assistant, and then I worked up to first assistant, and then after the first assistant that I started under left, and then when I started working for National Geographic, Mark, who was the first assistant when I started working for me as my assistant. And so there's this, but fashion has always driven. I love how people express themselves. I love it. It's just amazing. And when we think of it as an expression of psychology, it becomes even more amazing. What are people trying to say? And how do we craft identities, these very, very deep identities, right? Yeah. And what does fashion even mean? Like when I was a climber, when I was climbing a lot in my 20s, my fashion was like torn up pants, and like the dirtiest down jacket I could find with like duct tape all over it, because that was my fashion expression. I was claiming an identity. That's
Yeah.
why I think fashion is beautiful.
Yeah. I love it.
So it's fun. It's funny that you noted that, but it's been, yeah, I wish I could go back to it now, but you can see I'm really rocking it for you guys. My white t-shirt.
You're always rocking it. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
Tell us what you're doing in Rome.
Well, my dad is, well, I'm finishing the book. I'm finishing my edits, but my dad is, he's 80 and he's got stage 4. Well, he's got terminal liver cancer. And so he's really slow these days. And my mom and I wanted to kind of go on one last adventure. I mean, his movement is so impaired now that it's hard, but we've managed to just go see some things, because he was the one that taught us how to climb and taught us how to ski. And so to move around with him in this way is both heartbreaking, but also really illuminating and in some ways very life-giving, because it just it does put a timestamp on things in a meaningful way, where this is not I'm half his age, so this is not a forever game.
Right.
And it in some ways imparts a very deep sense of urgency on me to get my shit together and start, having the impact on the world that I really want to, which ironically, I don't think I've even scratched the surface of yet. So, yeah, it's just some time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to tell you, we measure everything with time, right? That's like our big, it's either cosmic time, digital time, whatever it is. And the fact that you're almost forcing time to slow down. You're playing a hand in it by spending that time with your dad. And it's one of the greatest gifts I think we can give. We always talk about the value of time. And I think that you slowing it down, pulling it in and just saying, no, the world needs to stop. You're still working. You're still doing a podcast at 11 o'clock at night. You're still making things happen. But where he is concerned, you've chosen to take control. I'm the youngest of 3, and my middle brother was born completely deaf.
Oh,
and
wow.
He's convinced, and he can lip read, and I never could get away with anything. He could read the side of my face, and I was telling on him, and he knew what I was doing, so he's very savvy. But he's never had stress clumps in your shoulders that you get really tight. He's never had a headache. And when I asked him why, I think he was 40 when I asked him, he said, "I'm not worried about time." And he said, "Hearing people made up time, and you're very controlled by it." And I thought, yeah, he's right. So I want to honor that you have made a concerted effort to slow down the time with you and your dad and your mom and your family together. It's powerful.
Yeah.
Well, it's very healing for us too. We've been through a lot, and also I keep joking that, I think this is what they call a healed family, and it could have gone a very different direction. But back to what we very first, story, there are 2 things. There's story and there's time. Time is what we have, and story is what we fill it up with and how we navigate it. And they're the 2. One is the most precious and the other is the most important thing that we have. And it's just love at this point. And I know that sounds so pithy, but it's true.
It is powerful. It's powerful, true.
Love. That might be the one thing that is healing, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing that you can rely on that's actually working in your favor.
Well, there's a really beautiful quote, and I think it's Buddha he said, like anger is like holding an ember in your hand with the intent to throw it at somebody. It's only you that gets burned. And and there's something to that where you can, and this takes a long time. This has taken, again, 42 years for me to come back to this place where I'm starting to realign. I've been so cerebral and so focused on creativity and so focused on making and doing that I really lost touch with what was happening down here. Yeah. And it only was very recently that I started to feel that I was reconnecting my head and my heart. And there's a lot of science that supports that healing happens when we come out of the sort of cerebral space and back down into our body space, which is what you were saying earlier about being in nature. And that connects us in a way. And
do you meditate? You
I do. Yeah, I do. But it usually like, I want to be the guy that's like, and I love Tim Ferriss. I want to be the guy that's like on Tim Ferriss being like, I wake up every morning at 5 and meditate for this long. And then I do this and then I journal and then I do this. And I'm like, man, it's kind of bullshit. I go in spurts, you know, I'll meditate every day at 5 in the morning for 6 months. And then I'll just not do it for 8 months. And it's fine. I think we're all trying to just hack our way through.
I completely agree with you. I think also when we put these measures of like, this is what we have to do, and give yourself permission to not do something, to do nothing.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing for me is like learning that doing nothing is actually probably good for me sometimes.
You guys know the term FOMO, right? Fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Have you heard JOMO?
No.
The joy of missing out.
I like
I'm
it.
really
I like it.
practicing that right now. I'm just like, no, it's cool. I know my life will speed back up, but right now it's this really beautiful, gentle moment where I get to write, and I'm, you know, the 2 books, and it's sort of like collecting life, tying a bow on it and being like, okay, that's done, next chapter. But right now it's just gentle time where I'm like, no, I've got some joy of missing out. It's
I like that. Jomo.
Jomo.
You are in Italy, Giacomo.
Yeah, right. So easy to say.
How much longer are you there?
Well, I think I'm coming home in 2 days. We've been here about 12 days. So, which is the longest time, you know, I left home when I was 15. So this is the longest time I've spent with my parents in 30 years. And that's, yeah.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. And we haven't fought once. I mean, I don't even know we haven't like even bickered. We haven't even bickered. It's great. So
That's so good.
really good.
Yeah. What good on you.
Yeah.
So when you'll go back, where do you go back to? Where's your life that happened?
My life right now is in Santa Monica. So I live, I'm
I live
neighbors.
down the street from you.
I know you do. And we actually, I know we're close, and there's a reason I know that I'll tell you after the show.
Uh-oh.
But no, it's not creepy, I promise. It's social.
At least I took Erewhon going.
Yeah, exactly. It's we're in the Palisades Erewhon. Spending every time I go in there, I'm like, well, I'm gonna spend a bank account for kale chips and some coconut water. And for some reason I keep doing it.
And you keep saying to yourself, I'm not going to do it next week.
I'm like, why? Why do I do that? But
that's really what I talked about when I was talking about addiction, by the way.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, well, we can get into the addiction stuff too. I've got nothing but time, and I love to talk about this stuff. But
I'm sorry.
So oh no, not at all. Santa Monica's home, and that's kind of, I still get to travel a little bit, but obviously post-COVID, or COVID, and then with a lot of this, like George Floyd, for example, all of that had a really big impact on my work, and I think in meaningful ways. And so I stepped away from National Geographic, and I stepped away from climbing recently to just kind of slow down in this moment before it speeds back up. So
yeah, I hear you. Will you go back to National Geographic or fashion photography, or both, or is it really your book now and kind of in pursuit of that?
It's my book. So there's 2 books. There's the memoir, which is called The Color of Everything. And then there's a coffee table book, which will come out 6 months after that. So the memoir comes out this time next year. And then coffee table comes out holiday 24. And that book is called Bipolar, which is a play on the fact that I've shot from the Arctic to Antarctica, but then uses my brain basically as a map to talk about how photography has shaped me. So
Very smart.
Yeah.
Oh, so beautiful. You're I don't know, your story, your adventure, the way you conceive of life and the way you conceive of art is truly inspiring.
It is.
Aw,
I'm having FOMO about your Jomo and Romo.
That was amazing. I want to high five the screen. That was great. Yeah, it's definitely been a journey, and it keeps unwinding. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's come up from writing that I'm like, oh God, now I need to look into that, and things that I'm learning about. I mean, I just keep pulling on this yarn ball of mental health and trying to figure out how deep it goes, not in me, but societally, because we see that is a real pandemic. It's a pandemic of the mind, and
it's got
what's causing
and because of the pandemic, it's become highly problematic.
It's become it amplified it,
Yeah, and people cannot ignore it. They cannot ignore it anymore.
No, they
can't act like it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, there's so much that's, and it's the pandemic, but then it's the whole cultural and societal structure that we've been raised in, men and women, and now we're seeing it just sort of spill over in ways that we haven't before. And I think you're right. It was tipped over and accelerated by isolation, which we know is.
And that's the worst thing you can do for somebody who's suffering from any kind of mental issue, is the feeling you're not heard, but now all of a sudden you're not seen either, and you feel completely at a loss. Well, I could talk to you for hours because you're fascinating and super fun.
Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. I love it. Thank you so much, Cory. And please, when you're in Santa Monica, I want you to yell really loud because I will hear you.
Next time, step out from the bushes. Next time, step out from the bushes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's right. That's what I will.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
No, thank you guys so much for having me. This is so great. It's such a joy. I really appreciate it.
And give your parents a big squeeze for me.
Yeah.
I will. I promise. Huge
Love
squeeze.
to your parents.
Yeah. Good.
All right. All right.
Awesome. I love him. I love him. He's such a sweetheart. And now I know, he told me before we came back where we had met or knew about each other. And it's through a friend of Bobby and I's, Kenny Kane, who is this amazing trainer who's just all about community and connection. And I could see, once he said that, I could see that in him. He's all about heart, kind of family, community. And of course, how incredible was he with his family? I mean, I literally almost cried a few times.
Well, I'm always so appreciative of anyone, any guest, anybody you ever meet who is willing to crack to show you the vulnerability, because those are the moments where we learn. We often think that we're going through pain alone, and no one can possibly understand what we're thinking or what we're feeling or what we're going through. And we all get into it. I do. Oh, woe is me. I'm going through so much. And to hear anyone crack open or watch them and say, no, this is what my life has been. It's not that you feel good because misery loves company. It's because you're not alone.
Yeah.
And, I'm not alone. Someone understands my pain, and I'm not mad. I'm not insane. I'm not walking this alone. So I know that, I think he is he's a treasured spirit. He really is.
Treasured spirit. And here's the other thing that is so great about what he was talking about, is that he has embraced a diagnosis back when he was 14 years old that he was bipolar, right? And yet it's not a handicap. He's turned that into, okay, that's a piece of me. And now I have all these tools. And that's really what, for me and for you, Melissa, it's what it's about. You find tools that work for you. It's what the Mariel Hemingway Foundation.org is about. It's about, let's help people find the tools that work for them. And that's so specific to each individual. He's so inspiring because he's saying, look, my grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, and I said this in the interview, as you heard, if he was living today, he would probably be diagnosed bipolar, but it doesn't make him less of a writer or less human, right?
That's right.
But he probably wouldn't drink as much as he did, but he was, self-medicating. So anyway, this has been an incredible, an amazing time, an amazing hour for our audience and for us, just to learn something about a human who's making everything work.
Well, and the good news is he wants to come back. So he wants to share more with the audience, and how lucky are we that we get to have him back. And I like, he's got a good sense of humor when you can laugh at yourself. Ariana Huffington posted something recently that I saw. She every once in a while will throw out these really feel good clips. And there was this video of a little baby. I mean, I don't know, like maybe 8 months old, between 6 and 8 months. And the baby is lying on his stomach and sees himself in the mirror, sees his reflection, and burst out laughing. For the baby laughter. For every time he'd look away for a minute, then he'd catch his glimpse again and burst out laughing. And the tagline is, never stop laughing at yourself. And when you've got a good sense of humor, well, I know that our audience is going to want to know where to find Cory Richards and all of his genius. Mariel, do you have his information?
Yes, I do. You can see him on Instagram, and it's a glorious page at Cory Richards, and that's CoryRichards. And you can also go to his site, which is CoryRichards.com. Pretty easy. And he's also on Twitter at Cory Richards. Check his photographs out, check his message out, because he's a special person. We got to stay connected with him, all of us, every one of us.
God love each and one of us, Tiny Tim.
And I'll see you again, all of you, and also you, Melissa.
I'll see you too.
Out Comes the Sun has been a production of Evolve Entertainment. Hosts Mariel Hemingway and Melissa Yamaguchi. Executive producer Jeremiah Higgins. And sound engineer and producer Richard Dr. D. Dugan. Thank you for listening.